it's Tawney here.
Allana.
And we're here with PeepShow Toys, and today we're going to talk about communicating sexual boundaries, which I think is a very important thing that we all need to know how to do with our partner.
Absolutely.
So for the first question, it's how do you identify when a boundary is based on like an insecurity or a fear versus a lack of sexual desire? So for me, I kind of think that this would revolve around like whether or not your worry or your boundary is based on something that only has to do with yourself. So if it's something that you are anticipating with a partner or a sexual act, that can be something where you're hitting kind of a wall sexually. But if it's something to do with yourself or your appearance or your mental state or what you're thinking, I think that is more of a boundary that's based on your own fears and insecurities. If you're worried about how you're going to perform or what you're going to do versus essentially how they are going to react to different things, then that can be more of a personal boundary and doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to have sex with the person.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that that's kind of, at least one of my ways of like identifying is basically just trying to figure out if it has to do with two people or if it has to do with just yourself and kind of what's going on in your head. What about you
I think a really good way of trying to identify the difference between something based in an insecurity or fear or lack of desire is the meaning that you're assigning to it.
Yeah.
Like, if you are interested in something, you have a desire for something, but maybe you're assigning some kind of meaning to it. Like, in the threesome scenario, if you wanted to invite someone else into your sex life, but you're afraid it might mean your partner will develop feelings for that person or more than you or something like that. Or like if you
like where you know that you're sexually interested in that threesome, but your mind is starting to kind of add these different scenarios in that are taking away that pleasure from you and making it into a hard boundary versus like something softer. No, I think that totally makes sense. And just kind of identifying like what you're associating with it, if it's something that is a hard no for you and is never going to change, or if it's something that your nerves are kind of getting the better of you and you're worried
making into something else.
The unknown can be very scary if you're not communicating it properly and what your boundaries are with it. Absolutely. If you have these fear-based decisions, how do you communicate that with your partner? Because that can be very scary because, like it's saying, it's fear-based. So you're already afraid of it. You're already afraid of where your mind's going and your worries associated with it. So how do you bring that up with your partner without kind of causing a disruption or potentially a disagreement and stuff?
I mean, I honestly recommend to always have really open communication about those kinds of things, period. Like to ideally like consistently check in with one another and communicate about those kinds of things and how you feel about them. But
it can always change.
Because it can always change. But specifically like communicating fear-based decisions, I feel like honestly just just having that open communication, I feel like makes it really easy to be able to be like, hey, I think I might be interested in doing this thing, but I'm afraid of it for these reasons.
Right. Because who knows, they might be able to talk you right out of that fear.
Yeah, they might be able to
concern.
Ease that insecurity or
fear. Which could just be so momentous, having, that fear and then having someone be able to go, that is not going to be an issue. Like, let me explain why. And then you might find that afterwards, the lust and excitement for that's still there after, they've kind of covered that for you. I also, at least for me, and I don't know if you experience this, but for me, I have a hard time sometimes verbalizing everything. I like to write it down because then I feel like I'm not missing anything, or if there's a disagreement that I can get all my points across. So for me, if you have a hard time just sitting down and going, hey, this is a problem for me, I also think that it's important that you can write it down. As long as you're not like sending it in a text message and running, like if you're going to write it down, maybe sit down with them while they're reading it and stuff and just go, this is just so I can make sure I have all my fears out and I don't forget anything and we can discuss this and then, and kind of have that open discussion about it and stuff. But I
think that's an amazing communication tool, and I think you should definitely always be open to accept like hearing people's thoughts in the form of writing, because like for so many people, I think it's so much easier to get it out in
Right.
writing.
And I think that this is important because if you're watching this, you might be struggling with how to have the conversation, but you also might be someone who doesn't have that issue, and then you might find that conversation's brought to you. And it's important to understand that there is a difference between somebody not wanting to have sex with you or not wanting to do something with you and something that they just need to discuss their hesitations with certain aspects of it. And then after that, it could be totally good to go. You just have to be open to listening to that and respecting them enough to have that conversation, I think.
Of course. And especially if someone has trauma from maybe not being received well in the past or not being able to communicate those things in the past, that can be even that much more difficult. So.
Right. Like, I don't know if you've had any experiences, but I've certainly had some where I've felt like somebody wasn't sexually attracted to me, only to find out that I was doing something wrong and they hadn't communicated that to me.
Yeah.
And that they didn't want to have sex with me because I was continuing to do this thing that was not but there was no communication there. And so my immediate go-to was, it's my fault. There's something wrong. And even though there's no way of knowing that and communicating that. And once it was communicated, it was so easy to fix. And then it was, fine again. And it just makes you think, oh, it was such a simple fix. Like, it could have been fixed so long ago. But, you get in your head and you start blaming it on yourself. And that can, be very difficult. So this kind of goes along the same lines as that communication, but telling your partner what you can't handle and why you should tell your partner what you can't handle. Yeah.
I mean, really, like, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but really just keeping that open communication is so important. Like, whether it's through writing or through verbal communication or both or whatever, like, really, I mean, I do understand how it can be hard to communicate things you can't handle, especially if that person really wants those things and you're maybe, like, the primary sexual, like, and, that's your, like, primary sexual relationship or whatever.
Right.
But it's so important. It is so important because if you put yourself in a position where you're engaging in something that you can't handle, then you're violating your own boundaries, and that's really, really rough.
And I feel like that can really grow resentment. And
yes,
if you're not verbalizing something and you're hating this situation or you're feeling forced into something or talked into something, that's never going to be enjoyable. And it's so important to understand that sex is supposed to be enjoyable. This is not supposed to be something that you're bearing through or,
Unfortunately, it is that for so many people because they don't know how to communicate those boundaries or to even recognize them necessarily. So I do think that's so important.
So then what are some examples of ways that you can bring it up that are aside from the very obvious, hey, stop, I don't like that, let's not do that. I think that another way is to provide an alternative. So if somebody, say, hypothetically, let's go into a little bit of the BDSM hands-on stuff, because I think that's where a lot of hard limits reside in regards to pain, in regards to role play, in regards to things of that nature. If I don't like pain play, or I don't like being spanked very much, it might not be about the impact, it might be about the sensation, to maybe offer up trying something like a chain tickler or a feather tickler, something that provides a different sensation and a spice in the bedroom that isn't going to give you pain, but it's going to give them something that they can deliver to you. Because a lot of times it's that delivery in some extent. So for me, it's offering an alternative that you can enjoy, and kind of going from there. Or for instance, what I've experienced in the past is having someone who really wanted to choke, but I didn't quite like the idea of being choked. So I had them put a hand on my chest, and that weight was enough for them, and it wasn't on my neck enough that we both found pleasure in that. And it was kind of a way to kind of spice that up a little bit. But so for me, that's it. I like to offer an alternative.
Yeah, I think that's so great. It's like for example, for me, like I live with chronic pain, and I like engaging in small amounts of like impact play and stuff like that, but because of my chronic pain I can't really engage in a lot of those things. Like I have there's just so much of it that I can't handle, so definitely like communicating, I can't handle this maybe for this exact reason, maybe the physical, like you don't like the physical sensation, like for example like the being choked, and they want the physical sensation of that weight or putting that weight on another person, right? Like I think that's so great. And then like, or maybe it's like something emotional, like maybe if someone is dominating you, just along those lines because we're using that as an example, and maybe you don't like the way that you're being engaged with emotionally you like being dominated, but you want it to be dominated with them behaving in a different way. You know what I mean? Like,
maybe you don't like the words they're using or the exactly.
So there's a lot of different ways and things that people might not be able to handle, and I think there's always alternatives.
Always. Yeah, and your partner should be open to being able to take those baby steps with you. I don't believe it should ever be all or nothing, and certainly in sex it is a two-way street, and if someone's telling you it's their way or the highway, pick the highway. It's much more pleasurable. It should never have to be something. It should be able to be a comfortable discussion, because if, I know we've said this probably a million times before, but if you can't trust your partner
and feel safe,
then who are you going to trust in that situation? Like that's they're there to share that intimate moment with you. Your partners or someone new you're dating or a friend, whoever the case is, you're sharing that intimate moment with them, and you should be able to share your intimate needs as well.
Yes.
So how do you navigate pleasing your partner and sticking to your boundaries in there? Because I know sometimes things can get a little hot and heavy, and it's hard to stick to boundaries. I mean, like in very classic cases, when you're much younger, perhaps before you've had sex and trying not to, but fooling around with, your partner and stuff sometimes things can happen when you get hot and heavy. So how do you keep your boundaries? For me, I think it's trusting your partner is a huge part of it. If you can't trust them to uphold what you need, then you might want to reevaluate sharing that moment with them. If you can't trust that they aren't going to hurt you or push that boundary, then that's a really important thing to kind of acknowledge in your relationship, because self-control should always be apparent in sex, no matter how extreme. I think,
absolutely. I think that really circles back to the why communicating your boundaries is so important, because really, if you've already had these discussions and talked about these things explicitly beforehand, then it won't be hard to please one another in the moment while respecting each other's boundaries, because you'll already know them. You'll be totally aware of those things, and you'll have hopefully discussed potentially alternatives to things and all those things, beforehand. Because also communicating boundaries in the moment of sex can often be coercive, unfortunately. So it's really, really important to communicate those things outside of that sexual situation, so that you can really respect each other in the moment.
And it's also important to know, like we've said before, that consent can change, and it can change in the heat of the moment. So you have to understand that you need to trust that your partner can flip like a switch, hear you, acknowledge that you need something to stop, and stop that. There should be no point in sex where you are so wound up that no is not acknowledged and respected.
Absolutely.
I can't think of a single situation, even in the throngs of having not seen each other in months and stuff, where it was a question of, are they going to stop if I say no? And so it's important to, I think, look into yourself and your relationship and know that there's that trust that needs to happen. And if you don't have that, that needs to be fixed or that situation eliminated. So what if you're the one who desires something sexually and your partner has given you the hard no? They do not want to do it. First of all, respect that. That's fine. It's not about tricking them or talking them into it or trying to move towards these things. I think like what we mentioned again before with the baby steps, finding something that is able to please you, even if it's not as much as that one act. So for instance, say like as an example, say you really, really want to do anal play, whether it's on your partner or on yourself, and your partner is not interested in either playing with you anally or doing anal on themselves. They're like, for instance, my partner does not really like anal play, but finds pleasure, we found, with just being rubbed like right underneath the ball sack and in between the anus. So it's like there's ways that like we've explored those pleasure points and those like erogenous zones without actually embarking on penetration, and that was pleasurable for me to kind of explore that and find that pleasure with them, but no lines were crossed despite getting. And then I did end up finding that as we're doing that more and more, they ended up becoming more interested in doing that, but that was a decision they came to on their own. That was not something that I continuously talked them into. It's just that comfort in exploring it. So that's kind of for me how I deal with that is just by switching it out and doing some baby steps with them and continued discussion.
Yeah, and really like stuff like that, exploring and alternatives and stuff like that, those are always options and like always things that you can explore with your partner or with whoever.
Yeah.
But really like what I want to say on like remaining supportive when someone's communicating their boundaries is really honestly, I mean, so much of us have trauma with communicating our boundaries. I think it's so important to explicitly say, you know, I respect your boundaries. I respect that you don't want to do something. I wouldn't ever want to do something with you that wouldn't be comfortable for you or that you wouldn't enjoy.
Right.
Like, just really anything that you can do or say to help them feel safe in that space, communicating those boundaries, I think is so important and really valuable. And then, you know, along those lines, communicating how you can still please one another without violating each other's boundaries and how you can explore those things together and stuff.
Yeah. And I think to speak to the case of some trauma situations, there might be times where you really just don't want to have sex at all whatsoever or be touched. And to not only be able to say, this is not you, this is something that I'm going through, and then to be able to be open to them doing things that they need. And I'm not talking about finding other people. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about being okay with them masturbating or being okay with them maybe being a little teasy with you in some certain circumstances, even if that means you're not having sex, being okay with having that repeated conversation, because as much as you need a pat on the back to know that your feelings are validated and your limits won't be crossed, they also need a pat on the back to say, I still care. I still I lust for you. This is some place that I am at mentally, and when I'm back, you know, it's like, on.
You can definitely, I think there's definitely a lot you can do to still help respect your partner's sexual needs and, like, help them meet those needs without engaging in things that you necessarily don't want to do. Like you said, like, whatever that means, like, you can explore that together. But
absolutely,
yeah, I think that's really important to, like you said, specifically if there's things you don't want to do, or if you don't want to do anything sexual, whatever, to really make that clear that it's not about them, or if it is about them, analyze that separately, because that's a whole other thing.
They're all discussions that need to be had either way, because you have to be able to communicate your sexual boundaries with your partner. It is just so important, because there's so many times we hear about so many instances where those limits are not brought up, in years and years of resentment, years and years of displeasure, years and years of being okay with mediocre sex. That can pile up, and it can just create this mentality where you don't believe that you deserve certain types of pleasure or respect. And that consent has been ignored, and no one deserves to be in that mindset. Sex is beautiful.
And you deserve pleasure. You deserve to have your needs met. You deserve to have your needs respected. Sex should be good for you.
Exactly. And if it's not, make it good for you.
Make it good.
Take control of your sex life. Communicate it with your partner. We wish you the best sexual journey. We wish you all the best conversations. And we hope that, that you find that comfort and that trust in your partner, and that your sex is stellar. So thank you all so much again. I'm Tawney.
Allana.
And we'll be back. Goodbye, everybody.